Well, good morning. Makes me nervous. The screen goes black, and I think, uh-oh, now what? We're good now, though, right? Apparently it was intended. So, paranoia for nothing. Imagine what they did before technology, right? I remember when I first was a youth pastor, we did songs up on the screen, and on the screen I mean the white wall behind where we did youth group, and by screen I mean we had an overhead projector, and that was cutting edge technology back in those days. We just flipped the projector. It was pretty awesome, right? So, come a long way. Anyways, so hey, listen, we're glad we're still working through our series as we look at the journey and our discipleship process. And as we've said before, so the reason we call it the journey is it's very similar to any of the epic movies that we've seen, any of those stories you've read. Friday I was eating my cheat lunch with my mom. I've been trying to eat better, and so I instead of eating fast food, 7 days a week, or junk food, I cut myself down to a meal or two a week. So on Fridays, I order wings, because, I teach from my basement, and my wife doesn't particularly care for wings. So I just eat them when she's not around. It's nice. And so we were laughing about some nonsense I did when I was growing up. But I was reminded of another one of those stories, Beowulf, right? I don't know if you guys remember that. But it just is proof that throughout human history that we've always looked for some sort of epic tale, that we look for a hero who goes from being a nobody to being somebody who's powerful, who's grown, who we see this transformation over time of. If you guys haven't, I risk saying this because of spoilers, but I kind of feel like if you're 2 months behind on a TV show that, spoilers, it's kind of almost too bad for you at this point. Honestly, guys, if you haven't watched it by now, the rest of the world can't be, and so even most recently, here we go. So if you haven't watched the last episode of The Mandalorian, oops, but Luke Skywalker shows up, and the internet broke. I feel like people freaked out, and not in the bad way. Normally people freak out on the internet, and it's the internet broke, and it's because people are angry. But the internet broke because people were really excited. And I think back to when I was a kid, or even as a teenager, I remember watching the old Star Wars, and you see Luke, and I was always like, that guy's kind of annoying. He's really whiny. He's just kind of a whiny teenager through most of the movies. And even now I catch myself, you watch him, you're like, okay, this is pretty awesome. He's come full circle. And it's just this idea that we go from, that we like to see people grow from being a whiny teenager, so to speak, or being somebody who's nothing, to being a mature person or wise old sage towards the end. And so we name the journey that because that's kind of what we see, right? Is you get to the end of that, and then we never love characters who have no flaws, who have no struggles, who have no growth. And so the idea of the reason we name it the journey is because that needs to be our thought process, right? Is there's never a time in our relationship with Jesus that we can say, well, we've arrived, right? We can never be at one point in our life here and be like, I pretty much have all the answers. I pretty much understand the Bible. There's not really much more for me to learn. There's not really many areas for me to grow in, because there's always going to be areas. That journey's going to continue until the day we go and see Jesus. So as we've always said here, is that the journey goes begins at conversion and ends in glorification. And if you're like, I'm not really sure what that means, well, conversion is on this life when you ultimately see Jesus for who he is and meet Jesus really for who he truly is. And glorification is when you end up in heaven and you live there without sin and you meet Jesus face to face. So in essence, your journey begins when you meet Jesus and it ends when you meet Jesus, right? So it's what happens in between that we want to see. So one of the biggest phrases you're going to hear us ask, and that we need to be always asking ourselves, and we're going to ask at the end of the sermon, and we're going to ask at the end of every sermon, and we probably have been already, now you know why, is we're going to ask ourselves, what is what is my next step? What is the next step that I can take in my journey as I get closer and closer to meeting Jesus? How can I take one more step that I might be more like him, that I might be closer to Jesus, that I might grow in my relationship with him? So that's kind of why we do that. That's the important part. So we're walking through our 6 practices, and these are what we found in the Bible and how they're going to help us grow in our relationship, right? And so I believe our next slide should be our purpose, or should be our mission statement, I believe. If I remember correctly, I get all confused in the beginning. Yep, there we go. So remember, it's always love God, love people, make disciples. And then we have our 6 practices, which is read, pray, give, gather, serve, and tell. So today, we basically start a 3, so we have our series, and then we have like a little mini part in here. The next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about stewardship, right? Everybody's like, okay, I'm checking out now. I'm not coming to church next week. We're talking about stewardship. That's all right, because I fooled you, because we're talking about money this week. So there you go. We're going to go ahead and get it out of the way, and then you can come back the next couple weeks and know that that's not going to be the focus. But we are going to talk about giving today. But see, it's a microcosm of what stewardship is. So stewardship is an understanding that we're not the owners of things, right? So we have this weird idea that we own stuff and that stuff belongs to us. It doesn't. It doesn't, right? I mean, if anything really belonged to us, then we wouldn't have to pay taxes on all of it. So see, there's part of that. But ultimately, God owns everything. He owns it all. It all belongs to him. You're like, oh, but I have my money. Well, that's really God's money that he lets you use. Your kids, they're not really your kids, they're God's kids, and he lets you raise them, right? I mean, we have to understand all of these things, right? We are simply stewards. What does a steward do? A steward manages property for the owner, which means it's our job to manage the things that God has entrusted us to, not the way that we want to, but the way that he would want us to. And so it's a big understanding. So we're going to spend the next 3 weeks, give, gather, and serve. And it's a little small idea of stewardship. So when we talk about gathering, it's an idea of our time, and making making what's primary. So if we say, well, how's gathering stewarding our time? Well, it's ensuring that we see the importance and the need to gather and to worship corporately, right? We make things important. We go to work. I hope you go to work regularly. But that's important. Those are things that we have to do, right? We have to get some sleep. We have to, well, we don't have to play on our phone, but we play on our phones a lot. We stream a lot of TV, right? All of us do. That's pretty normal. But it's also about stewarding our time. Am I saying those things are bad? I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm saying if they become more important than gathering with God's people and worshiping, that I would say then that becomes a problem. If you're up till 3 a.m. on Saturday night and you come to church Sunday morning and you're groggy and you're struggling and you can't stay awake and you can't pay attention, I would say we've stewarded our time poorly because we've not made gathering and worshiping important. I'd say the same thing throughout the week. If you stay up till 4 a.m. playing video games and go to work at 7 and you're struggling and falling asleep, then I'd say you've been a poor steward of your time because now you can't work as you should. So regardless, it's kind of across the board. Serving, it's using our talents that we might serve Jesus and we might serve others, right? So there's 3 steps: time, talent, and treasure, right? So this week, we're going to begin this idea of stewardship as we talk about treasure. And that would be the giving part, all right? Sam next week will cover gathering, then I'll be back and we'll talk about serving. So this is the part that nobody ever wants to hear in church, right? If you're online, maybe you've already clicked off. I hope you haven't, because I hope that we can look at giving in a more biblical sense, in a larger idea than just giving my tithes, okay? So that's an important part for us to talk about. How many people complain that all the church wants is your money? Oh, the church just wants our money. And I get it, man. We see these celebrity pastors with like private jets and all that stuff. Dude, I get it. I 100% get it, right? I promise you I'm not getting rich here. Like, that's the thing. More importantly, here's the thing is, I don't want your money. I don't want your money. We'll unpack that more in a minute. I want you to have a biblical understanding of money. Okay, that's an important thing. Let me fill you in on something. Jesus talked more about money than he did about anything else. That was one of his top things that he talked about was money. So to say that, oh, the church shouldn't talk about money, well, then we would have to be like Thomas Jefferson and cut out large chunks of the Gospels where Jesus talked about money. Because, man, it's important. It is necessary. I read a statistic that 80% of the people think about, like, it's like 80% of our time thought is thought about money. 80% of the things that we stress about is money. The most common reason people get divorced is over financial issues. So it's a thing. It is important for us to talk about. And if we in the church don't talk about it, then somebody else is going to talk about it. Okay? All right, so if you have your Bibles, open with me to Matthew chapter 6. It's 761 in your Pew Bible. And we're gonna look at starting in verse 19. Jesus is speaking here. So if you have one of those Bibles with red letters, these letters would be red. He says, "Do not lay up yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." I'm going to read verse 21 again. I think it's important. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." So I want us to we're going to ask two big questions today, and then we're going to ask them and we're going to answer them. So the first question we need to ask this morning is, why do we give? Why do I give? Why? Eric, why do I have to give? Well, that's a good question. The first thing I want to say is that what we treasure reveals what we love. What we treasure reveals what we love. Show me where you spend your time, your talent, and your treasure, and I will show you what you love. If you pulled up your bank account and you showed me what you spent your money on, I could determine what you love and what you care about. If you show me your phone and you show me where you spend your time doing, I can show you what you love. It's important for us to understand that. See, it's about knowing who owns what. It's very easy for us to be like, well, I can spend my money. I can go do this. It's very easy to do that when we think it's our money. Ready for this? It's not our money. We are simply stewards. God has provided financial means for us. He's provided 24 hours a day for every single one of us. He's provided all of these things. He's provided our money for us. It is simply our job to manage it, not how we want, but how He would want. And again, I already hear the pushback, but I'm the one who goes and works. You're right. Who's the one who gave you those abilities to go to do the job that you have? Who's the one who gave you the brain to be able to do that? Or the physical skills to be able to do your job? Who's the one who, as Acts 17 tells us, has placed you exactly where you were supposed to be right now, that you might have that job to make that money? God. In case you're curious. That's the answer. So it's understanding that. See, the issue becomes, if we don't know who owns our stuff begins to own us. Maybe you've never been there, but there's been plenty of us, myself included, who have run up credit card bills or have run up debt because there's things that we want that we can't afford, but we go, listen, I'm just going to find a way to do it anyways. When I was in the Navy, I had to counsel a young sailor because he'd been going to one of those check cashing places. You guys know what I'm talking about? You write a check, you post-date a check, and you go in there, and then they give you money, and then you have to pay 50% interest every 2 weeks. And then you end up in this cycle where you can never get out of it. Actually, they're considered predatory loans, and they're so bad that by federal law, they cannot loan to military members anymore because people were losing their security clearance because they were so deeply in debt. I learned that because I tried to take one of those rapid refund things. You guys know that's a loan, right? I don't know if you guys know that. Like when you do the rapid refund and you get like 24 hours later when you do your taxes, that's actually not your money. They're just giving you a loan, and then they just take your tax return when it comes in. I wasn't sure if you knew that. So I was going to do that once. I think we were trying to go, so I don't remember why. But the guy was like, yeah, we can't do this because you get money from the VA, which means that you're still attached to there's still some military, and we're not allowed to do that for you. And that's what I did the research. I was like, oh, that makes some sense now. Because why the problem that we end up with this debt, we end up with all of this stuff. It's because we desire things that we cannot have, and we have a poor understanding of whose money that we're blowing. See, everything that we own, it belongs to God anyways. It all belongs to Him. He gets to look at everything and say, that's all mine. Every blade of grass, every square inch of earth, every star in the sky, every molecule in the cosmos belongs. God says, that's all mine. I created, I sustain it. It belongs to me. See, when we think about that, when we don't think of it in that way, it then becomes much easier to be irresponsible and to have a poor view of financial and finances and money when it comes to thinking about that it belongs to us, number one. Because number two, because then it ends up we belong to it. We have to think about what is God's purpose for our stuff. Everything that He's given us, everything He has allowed us to use, it's that we are to leverage it for the gospel. It means that we use our money, we use our time, we use our talents, that we might make much of Jesus. Am I saying that you can't have fun with your money? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that men, husbands, wannabe husbands, future husbands, listen, a good way is to take your wife out on a date. I believe that truly honors God, to continue to date your spouse or to date your significant other, to care for them, to love them, to clothe your kids, to pay your rent. There is a benefit to that. Like God does desire that we would enjoy life and that we would have joy and that we would experience things. The problem is when joy and want, desire, like becomes greater than paying our bills, giving at church. That's when we begin to see some issues and have some problems. I have a friend, they want to remain nameless. They live as if the things they own don't even belong to them. Hey, can I borrow your car? They're like, yeah, sure, here you go. You can take it. Here you go. Open their home to people. I mean, he would probably give me the shirt off his back. He's pretty small. I don't think it would fit me. But I think he wears a medium, actually, legitimately. He was like, yeah, I'm like a medium. I was like, I wore a medium when I was like 12. But that's the thing is, you see people like that, and then we look at them and we go, wow, that's wonderful. And then what do? We go home and we charge stuff on our credit card. Only in our country do we say how thankful we are for everything that we have, and then we go shop at midnight to get more stuff in our house. Oh, I'm so thankful for my family and everything I have. And then hours later, we're elbowing people out of the way like we're Charles Barkley at Black Friday sales, right? I mean, it's just this weird idea. It's just this complete issue that we have. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. Our job, though, is that we must leverage everything in our lives for the glory of God and to the advancement of the gospel. So as we talk about why do we give, the first thing we have to understand is what we treasure, what we spend our money on reveals what we love. What everyone hates to hear about is giving to church. And I want us to look at it from a different perspective. Let me ask you a question, rhetorical, of course. Do you love your church? Do you love your church? Do you love Jesus? So then why should it be an issue that we would give our offerings? I mean, do we love our church more than we love Dunks? More than we love Starbucks? And it's weird because we're so free to give to those things. Or, hey, listen, I have a friend, their mother passed away. I want to give money for their funeral. I want to give money for that. We're so happy to do that. But when it comes time for the pastor to stand up and say, hey, listen, we have to give money to the church, whoa. It's almost like we say, well, Jesus, you could have my life. You can save me from my sins, but don't touch my bank account. It's an issue that we have, right? I want us to think about it in a different way, right? Because the other thing I want us to have is we give, number one, it reveals what we love. Number two, it gives us financial freedom. That's right. We can have financial freedom. What? Now stop for a second. This isn't like you won the lottery. You can't just give money in the offering and you're going to win the lottery. You're going to make $1 million. Like, that's not what I'm saying. So don't hear that. Don't hear things that I'm not saying. I'm saying is that we can have financial freedom. What does that mean? It means that we are no longer required to be beholden to what the world sees as important. When we prioritize Jesus in our finances, it changes the way that we look at things. It's an old phrase. Some of you guys are young and probably have never heard of this. But it's this idea of keeping up with the Joneses. It's this idea of the American dream that when our neighbor gets something cool, we have to get something cool. Oh, my neighbor got a 57-inch? Well, I need a 59-inch TV. Oh, my neighbor got a 2012 truck? Well, now I need a 2015. Right? Because I don't want to be the person on the block who doesn't have what everybody else has. Jesus talks about that. Think about it. When he says, if you're invited to a dinner, what does he tell you to do? He says, don't be like everybody else and go sit at the seat of honor. He says, go seek the lower seat. Because that way, if you are honored, you'll be moved up. And if you're not honored, then that's embarrassing. If you go in and go sit in the front seat and Jesus, the host goes, ho, that seat's not for you. You need to go sit back there. That seat's for somebody else. See, the problem is too many times we want to rush to that seat so we can be like, look at my nice car, look at my new truck, look at my big TV, look at my giant house, look at all the stuff that I have, and we're trying to impress people that we probably don't really even like that much. But yet we desire to do that. Why is that the problem? The problem is that we desire to find our status in our things. By the label in our clothes. By the logo on our sneakers. Don't read something that I'm not saying. I'm not saying there's something, again, wrong with buying quality clothes. I think I've shared this story before. I used to wear cheap Walmart socks. I don't have an issue with cheap Walmart socks. That's until I wore nice socks for the first time. I blame my wife now for this. They're different. They feel different. Here's the cool part. They last longer. Sure, they're a little more expensive up front, but I don't replace them. Like, I have like 5-year-old Nike socks that still like are elastic. They still are comfortable. I mean, I've lost, the dryer's eaten a bunch of them. But at the end of the day, they last longer. So listen, I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with buying nice things, spending a little extra money. What I'm saying is, it's the attitude behind it that becomes the problem. Well, I got to get this Louis Vuitton bag because I want everybody to see it. Well, the problem becomes what? It's not about that. It's about what? It's about the status of having something, of proving something to other people that you're a big deal. And the problem is we become so obsessed with that it transforms the way that we do things. If our treasure and our love is in our things, how can we truly love Jesus? He says it, you cannot serve two masters. If we're so obsessed with money, if we're so obsessed with finances, if we're so obsessed with those things, how do we truly love Jesus? How are we freed up to do things with our finances that can glorify God? If we're so deeply in debt that we have to pay off our debt so much every month, how do we have the financial freedom to give freely to for his kingdom work? The issue is when we do begin to see finances in a way through the gospel, understanding that Jesus is that we see that we're not required to live above and beyond our means anymore. See, it's about what is our status in. It's about what we find comfort in. It's about what we find our trust in. If we put our trust in our things and our status and all of those things, then we continue to seek that. The issue becomes if we find our status and we put our trust in Jesus, well then it transforms those things. If Jesus becomes our priority, then we don't have to worry about what that random person we passed on the T thinks. Well, what if they think my bag's from Target? Well, what if they think my bag's from Target? I mean, like, who cares? Target has some sweet shirts. Like, I buy stuff there all the time. It's awesome. But see, we get to say, well, listen, that's not important anymore. What's important is that I might do those things. We can't serve Jesus and money. We're no longer enslaved to the bondage of seeking hierarchy, of seeking people to think that we are greater than we are because we can spend money on stuff that we don't really need. So why do I give? I give that I might live in response to the gospel. We give because Jesus ultimately gave for us. He died on the cross that we might trust in him for our eternity, for our salvation. As if we trust him for our salvation that's eternal, why would we not trust him for our finances, which are temporary? So if our first question is, why do I give? We give in response to Jesus. We give as we're commanded, which we'll talk about momentarily, right? The next question that we have to ask is, well, how do I give? All right, Eric, so you told me, why do I give? I give because Jesus tells me to. I give because it's his stuff anyways, and I'm just giving a portion back to him. But then how do I give, right? What do we always hear? Give a tithe. 10%. 10%, right? 10%. So let's talk about that for a second. Because if you've ever been here, I've never really taught 10%. Talk about it in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, right? As I'm not saying the Old Testament's abolished. What I'm saying is 10% was always what they were given. It's this bare minimum thing, right? But you know what they gave 10% of? Everything. Everything. You guys ever play Monopoly? It's kind of, we don't really play it in our house anymore. Because it's really just like, let's spend 2 hours so Eric can win. That's true. Hey, listen, you know what? Here's the problem. Is Monopoly, it's almost like the more viciously competitive you are, the better chance you have of winning. And unfortunately, I have a disease. And so, yeah, it's bad. But you guys ever hit income tax? Like, that's like literally the worst thing ever, right? It's to give 200% or 10% of everything you own. Have you ever actually had somebody try to figure out what 10% of what they own is? Very quickly, that becomes terrible. Because you're like, oh, look, I own 8 pieces of property. I own 4 hotels. I own all the... And then you're like, wow, I have to give a whole lot more. You know what? Just take my $200. It's cool. I saved some money. So listen, 10% is 10% of all of it, of everything. Here's what you... So think about that for a second. Here's my other issue with 10%. As we move on, right, as we kind of get an idea, which we're going to talk about the Old Testament. I believe that so many times that we see that 10% as, how can I hit the very bare minimum that God requires of me so I can put the check in the box and say that I'm good to go, that I'm a very spiritual person. We do. I think many of us do that. And listen, I'm a pastor, so I have a little more insight. I have a little bit of insight on this when I talk to people about this. But that tends to be the case. We get our calculators out, and we go, I made this. And then you have the question, do I give 10% of my... Do I give 10% on my gross? Do I give 10% on my net? Well, somebody gave me $20 for a gift. Do I give 10% of that? See where it goes? Ultimately, what are we asking? God, what is the very bare minimum I can do that I might make you happy? What's the problem with that? We're not responding to the creator of the universe out of a love. We're not responding to the creator of the universe out of gratitude, out of what we can do. We're saying, God, what is the very least I can do to get by? Let me ask you a question. In any other relationship that you're in, if you sought to do the very least you could do to get by, how healthy would that relationship be? Those of you who are married, if you were like, what is the bare minimum I can do to make my spouse happy? How happy is your marriage? How much joy would you take in your home? Those of you who are dating, if your significant other was like, what is the bare minimum I can do to make this other person happy? How long is that relationship going to stick around? I'd hope you dump. Honestly, I'd hope you dump them pretty quickly. Because that person is no longer thinking about you, are they? They're thinking about themselves. What is the very minimum I can do so I can still do everything that I want to do and do just enough that I look like I'm doing pretty good? See, therein lies kind of the issue. So how do I give? We're going to look at three areas that we could do it and three how we do it. The number one area is that I believe we are to give regularly. We are to give regularly. That doesn't mean when the offering, so what do I mean by that? It means that when the offering plate goes around, we don't pull out our wallet and be like, oh, I got $5 in here. I'll just throw that in this week and maybe out. No, we give regularly. Look what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16. He says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. Look what he's telling them to do. He's like, the first of every week, set some money aside. Give it. Proverbs backs that up. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. What's the principle we say? Okay, no, stop for a second. Those of you guys who know that we talk about hermeneutics here, I'm not apples to apples or anything like that. What am I saying? What's the principle that we learn here? Is that we make the point to set aside what we're going to give to God. Proverbs tells us that we give away. He says, give your first fruit, the first that come up, give that away. I think too many of us see giving to our church as we give out of what we have left over. Let me pay my bills. Let me get Starbucks. Let me get Dunks. Let me go out to eat. Let me go buy some clothes. Let me go do everything that I want to do, and let's see what's left. Oop, that's all I got. God, you get a little bit. The problem is now we're honoring God with our leftovers. That'd be like inviting someone to our house and being like, you know what, I thought about making dinner for you, but I got some Tupperware in my fridge. So I'm going to pop that in the microwave, and I'm going to give it to you. I mean, that's not necessarily terrible, but could you imagine inviting somebody over for a dinner at your house and then just throwing them some Tupperware and be like, well, go pop that in the microwave. That's what we had the other night, and that's really all I'm willing to give you. But so, see, the issue becomes, I think many of us, that's how we treat giving in church. It's we do everything else, and then we go, well, what's left over? And it's not about the action, it's about the heart behind it. What does the heart behind that say? It says that, God, you're not my priority. Everything else is my priority, and you get what's left over of your stuff. What do I believe is the most biblical one? Is that we say, on this time I'm going to give. I get paid on the 1st and the 15th. I'm going to give on the 1st, and I'm going to give on the 15th. And I'm going to give, and I have made a plan to do so. That's the difference. You see the difference between, oh, look, now the offering's coming around. What do I got? And I have planned to give. Why? Because now it is something that is thoughtful, that we have thought, we have prayed, we have considered to ensure that we do. We give regularly. Why? Because it requires us to think about what we're going to give and to have a priority in giving. Number 2, we give generously. We give generously. 2 Corinthians 9 tells us, the point is this: whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. You guys ever have a garden? This summer, Kayla and I, we built a little garden box, and we planted some stuff. I actually had to build a second garden box because that stuff grew like crazy. Like it was like overtaking part of our porch. We planted grass seed. We did it a little bit late. It didn't quite grow in the way I wanted it to, but it looks like it's going to grow in this spring. But here's the thing is, when I went to go plant that grass, I had a couple of options. Do I want to grow a lot of grass, or do I just want to grow patchy grass? I didn't want to grow patchy grass. I grew patchy grass. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted to grow like luscious, green, like you could play golf on it grass, right? Well, if I'm going to do that, how am I going to plant grass in my backyard? I'm going to put a lot of grass seed down so it grows, right? So the question is, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And believe it's about the heart of our intentions. This is where I really believe prosperity theology just distorts what is true. Do I believe that those of us who give and give and give out of a gracious heart and give generously, do I believe that God rewards those people financially? The Bible looks very clear like he does. But I believe that they take it and they twist it incorrectly. Basically, it's this idea that if I give, then I'm going to get so much more money. If I give 10%, then God's going to bless me 10%. If I give 40%, then God's going to bless me 40%, and I can go buy a Mercedes. I don't believe that's the case. I believe the case is that God blesses us financially. Why? That we can give more. If I give and God blesses me financially, well, now what? Now my income's bigger, and I have more disposable income, and I can give more. I believe just from reading this, so we should not feel compelled to give. Now, hold on a second here. I know it. I can hear the out already. Well, you know, Eric, I'm not a cheerful giver, so I'm just not going to give, because the Bible says, not under compulsion, and I would feel compelled if I gave. Come on, that sounds wicked spiritual, doesn't it? Like it sounds good. Because it sounds spiritual doesn't mean it's true. What's the problem become? It's not, we don't get to only be obedient when we're cheerful, right? That'd be like, well, you know, Eric, I want to not have sex outside of marriage, but I'm not very happy about it, so I'm just not going to do it. We'd all be like, yeah, that's not okay. That's wrong. Well, you know, I really want to be cheerful about not stealing, but I'm not, so I'm going to go ahead and steal anyways. Do you see how that falls apart? We don't get to just be obedient when we're cheerful about it. The issue becomes if we're not a cheerful giver, it's an issue with our heart and not an issue with what Jesus tells us to do. So who needs to transform? Well, we need to transform, right? And if in the beginning we have to give begrudgingly, then what happens? We give and we are honest with God about it. God, my attitude about giving is awful. Lord, it is sinful. I'm going to be obedient anyways. And I understand that my heart is wrong in this area. We should give and desire to give out of a response of what God has done for us. I think that's the other part that we miss, is that it's very easy to be begrudging and to decide not to give when we forget what God has done for us. And it goes back to a poor view of God and a poor view of ourselves. If in essence our idea is that, well, ultimately I'm not that bad of a person, so God hasn't forgiven me of that much, So I'm that thankful. You're talking about with our leadership team this week, is that we have this view. If we were going to be on a spectrum, right? And we were going to say that Hitler's on this end as the most evil person ever. There's people probably worse than him. But if we say, here's Hitler, and he's the worst guy ever. And then here's Jesus, and here's God, who's holy and perfect. And I said, put yourself somewhere on that spectrum. Most of us are going to go, well, I'm probably like here, right? I mean, dude, Hitler's a terrible guy. I'm nowhere near that dude. I mean, look at that guy down the street. I'm way better than he is. That's got to get me closer to Jesus, right? Folks, on that spectrum, we're like here. You guys understand that, right? Think about it. What does Jesus say? What does Jesus say? He says, if you have had anger in your heart against another person, then you've committed murder. Every time you have been angry with someone in your heart, you've essentially committed murder. Why? Because the condition of the heart of our anger is the same as the condition of our heart when we choose to murder somebody. So every time I have called somebody a moron in traffic, I've essentially committed murder. Basically a serial killer every time I drive. Sadly true. So those 6 million people that he put to death pales in comparison to what I do every time I drive back and forth to work. It's been said that if you look upon a woman or man with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. Think about that for a second. There no longer is a white lie, folks. A white lie is what? It's just a lie. Oh, sure, that shirt does look good on you. See what I'm saying? So in this big scheme of things, when we forget how much God has done, how much God has provided, it's much easier to be selfish. It's much easier to penny pinch when it comes to giving to Jesus. We forget that he has created us. He sustains us. He provides for us. He is, those of us who have placed our faith in Christ, he has saved us in all of eternity. He has given us all good things. Everything that we have ever experienced that is good comes from him. And then yet we say, oh, I don't know about that. It's an issue with our heart. We have to decide in our heart how much to give. We give generously. Ready for the last one? When we give generously, then we can then give sacrificially. We can give sacrificially. 2 Corinthians 8 says, we want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia, not the most wealthy, affluent churches in the ancient world. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. You guys want to know something? You know who's the best givers in the church? Poor people. I'm serious. They have done statistics on this. Though people who are destitute, people who are poor, are much better givers than people as we go up the spectrum. What? People who, by all natural means, should not be able to afford to give out of what they make, give far better than those who have a disposable income. It's because when people know what poverty is, they're much more thankful for what they have. You ever met someone who grew up dirt poor and then was able to make money and isn't poor anymore? You ever met people like that? So many of them are just some of the most giving. I know a guy locally who's like that. You would never know he has money. You would never know it. Dude just gives and gives and gives and gives back to his community. Just drops money here and there like it's nothing. Why? Because he knows what it's like to be poor. He knows what it's like to live in the projects. He knows what it's like to grow up like that. And he was able to through decisions that he made, and he's not a believer, and he's able to do that, and now he just gives back freely. What does that mean? I believe that as we read this, is that when we give, it should affect our lives. Our lives should be affected by how much we give. We should give regularly. We make a plan to give. We should give generously, unbegrudgingly, thankfully, and we should give sacrificially. We should give enough that it does change our lifestyle. Why is that? Well, it's a reflection of what Jesus did for us, who gave sacrificially, who literally gave his life that we might know God, that we might be forgiven of sin. So to say that we are to give in a way that affects our life, I believe is very in line with what the gospel teaches, very in line with what we see about the churches of Macedonia, that they gave of their extreme poverty and overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, listen to this, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Do you hear this? One of the poorest regions, one of the poorest early churches, look what it says they did. They begged earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Paul, we're so poor, but can we please just give more that we might take care of these other churches? Do you know 2.5% of people give regularly who claim to be Christians? 2.5%. Ooh, that's brutal. We are the people who've been given the most, who should be giving the most. Could you imagine if the people in our churches gave in a way that was regular, generous, and sacrificial? And I don't necessarily just mean First Church, I mean churches around. Could you imagine the impact that we could have in the communities around us? Could you imagine the transformative things that we could do with the financial freedom that our churches could be provided? The impact we could have in the community. The impact we could have globally in sending missionaries. The impact that we could have in planting churches. That's what I pray, is I pray that God would allow our church to grow, that we would be able to have a financial freedom, that we would not worry about finances, because we would be able to pay our bills and above and beyond, that we could look at places and we could look at other churches and be like, oh man, you guys need a new boiler? Here, let's write you a check for it. Oh, this young couple, you guys want to go halfway around the world as missionaries? Here, let us help cover the first 6 months of what you need to do so. That we would have financial freedom, that we could see God's kingdom advanced and not be hemmed in by going, oh man, can we pay the oil bill this month? Could you imagine the financial freedom that would give our churches if the people who claim to love Jesus gave in a way that reflected that? Could you imagine how our lives would respond if we truly understood, and the freedom that we would have financially if we truly understood who our things belong to and who provided for us? Listen, I'm not saying not to be unwise with our money. I'm not saying not to save. I'm not saying not to pay off debt. Those are not the things that I'm saying. What I'm saying is to look at every single one of those aspects through the lens of the gospel, understanding that it all belongs to Him anyways, and that we are to manage what we do. We are to manage our finances in a way that brings glory and brings honor to Jesus, and that gives us the most opportunity to advance His gospel as a response to a loving Heavenly Father who has provided for us financially, who has provided for our sin that we might be forgiven, and we give abundantly and we give lovingly as a response to that. And we do so how? Regularly, generously, and sacrificially. Why do I choose to use those words? Because we see that's how God gives us. He provides for us regularly. He provides for us generously. Think about that. Just think about that for a second. Think about everything in our world that we have. He doesn't have to give us in the way that he does so, but he chooses to. That we would have extra money, that we would have life that we can enjoy, that we would have all these other things. He gives lovingly and of abundance, generously. And then finally he gives us sacrificially. That he gives Jesus, that he would die on the cross, that we would be forgiven of sins. See, it ultimately comes back as a response and a reflection to the gospel. It comes back as a response and a reflection of how God has provided for us. So let me ask you a question this morning. How will we respond? How can we respond to the Bible? Well, we can do what we normally do, right? Oh, pastor's talking about money. Leave my phone out. I'm going to nod and I'm going to smile. Or we go, man, that's really good, and we leave. And then, nothing changes. I hope that that's never the case, not even just, especially because we're talking about money today, but just kind of in general. I hope that we respond in a way that shows those around us, that shows our loved ones, that shows the world that we love Jesus. And we respond in a way that does so, that honors him, honors what he's done, and honors what he's given us. Let me just ask you simply today, what is your next step? What is your next step in your relationship with Jesus? We talked about the gospel. We talk about how Jesus has given his life for us. Have you placed your faith in Christ? Have you repented, turned from your sin, and turned to Jesus? If not, then I would encourage you to do so. If you can't look on your life and say, at that moment in my life, I believed and I placed my faith in Christ, then do so this morning. Number one. Number two, if you're a believer, begin thinking this morning and over the next few weeks about stewardship, about how I can manage my time, my talent, and my treasure in a way that honors God. And beginning this morning, how might I manage and steward financial resources in a